Hello everybody and welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be talking about Todoroki vs Zuko. Pretty soon Death Battle will be releasing their own video on the very same topic, and I happen to be a fan of both series, so I wanted to throw my hat into the ring and get my own take on the matchup, really consider all the different points, all the different feats, and make this my introduction into the power scaling community on YouTube, as I happen to really like power scaling, and I kind of want to make that interest more of a proactive thing, so here we go. As is generally the case with videos of this nature, I'm going to tackle the speed, strength, and durability of the characters involved. And I'm going to look at speed first, just because it is the most vague of the three categories for both characters involved, and I do want to just get it out of the way now. Starting with the Avatar verse, there is one convenient thing about it. There is not much disparity in speed between the characters within the verse. Generally, all of the characters are in the same relative tier of speed. You never have that classic anime scene where one character is fighting another character, and then the other character is so fast that the other character can't see them. That doesn't happen in Avatar. Every character is roughly on the same level in speed, and most bending battles come down to who is more skilled and who is more powerful. Usually not who is faster. However, before I continue, I do want to get one thing out of the way. I do not think that Avatar characters are lightning timers, and there are a lot of reasons for this. Specifically because it introduces a lot of inconsistencies into the power scale of the series and just how the characters are overall portrayed. I know that it's very tempting to just look at this feat of Zuko intercepting a lightning bolt and being like, hey, you know, I guess every character is a lightning timer, and I get that, but overall it just seems like a huge outlier to me, and instead of focusing on that feat, I'm going to focus on other feats in the series to come up with a more consistent power scale for speed in the Avatar verse. For example, one thing that Avatar characters are consistently able to do is react to arrows that are fired at them. That is not something people are typically able to do in real life, so I would say that is a subsonic reaction speed feat, and places most Avatar characters that are combative at that relative tier of speed. That being said, there is a feat that I do want to bring up that makes this a little more interesting. Specifically, Combustion Man and his bending style introduce an interesting speed feat into the series. Combustion Bending is a very interesting bending style in the series because it is the only one that is shown to specifically have this sonic boom effect around it. This is very different from any other bending attack we see in the entire series, and it gives it this portrayal of being especially fast. Now this is important because when Combustion Man attacks Aang in the group, there is a moment where Aang is able to barely dodge the attack. You could say that Aang is actually dodging the explosion, which would put his reaction speed to being at least Mach 4, but to me it looks more like he dodged the attack itself and then countered the resulting explosion. This sort of interpretation would place Aang at having a supersonic reaction speed, and if you believe that Zuko is relative in speed to Aang, then this would mean that Zuko also has a supersonic reaction speed and combat speed. But how does Todoroki stack up to that? Well, unfortunately, he doesn't have any notable feats within the current arc in the manga, but he does have an important speed feat in the Endeavor Agency arc that happened relatively recently. In this panel here, it shows Todoroki, Bakugo, and Deku all chasing after Endeavor. They are all presumably going at their top speed with Deku at 8%, and Todoroki only ends up lagging behind a little bit. And when the chase is over, it shows that Todoroki really only got there at the last second of the relatively short fight. This suggests to me that Todoroki is only a little bit slower than 8% Deku, and this disparity in speed was only noticeable when the distance traveled was very large. Now, it is important to keep in mind that this was a travel speed that Todoroki was able to get to due to his ice, but he should have a reaction speed that would allow him to travel that fast and also know where he is going. So the question stands, how fast is 8% Deku so that we can scale Todoroki to that? Well, in terms of travel speed, 5% Deku was shown to be subsonic, far faster than the human eye could interpret, as he was able to match Ida's Recipro Burst in the fight against Stain. However, for a more accurate speed feat, I am going to be looking at the first My Hero Academia movie. In this movie, it shows that Deku, on 2 occasions, was able to react to bullet fire. Now, while you could say that the first bullet timing feat was him just moving quickly and throwing off their aim, the way that this scene in particular is framed, it seems to me that Deku rose his arm to block after the bullet was fired. So, while Deku probably only has a high subsonic travel speed, his combat and reaction speed are absolutely bullet timer level. Now, I know that there is a lot of dispute still in the fandom about whether these movies are canon or not, and while I don't feel like debating that at all, I do want to point out how Horikoshi, the author of the manga, was the chief supervisor on the Two Heroes movie. And even if the story itself isn't canon, he would have significant control over how his main characters are portrayed, especially in their strength. Plus, this isn't exactly contradictory of anything in the manga material. Just because his travel speed is only subsonic doesn't mean he can't have bullet timing reaction speeds. Now, if we do accept these feats, then that would place Deku's reaction speed at being probably above Mach 2, as most handgun bullets are at least a little above Mach 2. But the problem with that is we're not talking about 5% Deku here to scale Todoroki. We're talking about 8% Deku. So how exactly big is that jump? Well, while we aren't given an exact way to measure that aside from just 5 to 8%, although I don't find that to be very reliable, I do want to look at Deku and Bakugo's second fight when he actually makes that jump for the first time. In that fight, Bakugo describes Deku as being way faster than before, and he was barely able to block in time. It's not exactly a blitz or anything like that, but it definitely is a big enough jump in speed where I wouldn't be surprised if Deku's travel speed certainly hit that supersonic level. So if that's the case, then that would mean Todoroki must have a reaction speed that matches that significant travel speed, placing him at also having a supersonic reaction speed, probably relative to Zuko's. That being said, Todoroki does have the advantage of using his ice to increase his travel speed to a level that matches his reaction speed, and Zuko unfortunately doesn't really have that advantage, as even in the comics his ability of using his fire to fly is limited, it seems. Overall, their speed is relative to each other's, and Todoroki would likely only use his ice as a way to disengage and continue fighting from a distance like he does in most of his fights. That's just his style. Alright, so speed is done. That was the most roundabout way I could have gone about it. I spent more time talking about the main characters than the actual people I'm supposed to be scaling, but we're past that and it's done. Now I can move on to strength. Just pure physical punching power. This one is really easy. There was a time when Zuko had to rescue Iroh, he kicked through some chains, pretty much shattered the iron. Dude's really strong. Todoroki, on the other hand, he doesn't really punch much or kick much or anything like that. He relies entirely on his quirk to fight, so in the absence of feats, I'm just going to assume he hits like a bitch. There, strength done. And with strength out of the way, we can move on to durability. How hard of a hit can they tank? Well, with Zuko, it's pretty straightforward. He takes a lot of hits throughout the series. He falls, he gets hit, he takes attacks all the time. However, his most definitive feats of durability, I think, are when he clashes with Aang and when he clashes with Azula, and the resulting explosion blasts them both away. Both times, he is able to get up with relative ease, meaning he is likely able to take twice the brunt force of his own firepower without much trouble. Todoroki is unfortunately a little more vague when it comes to his durability. The only real feat I can give him is when he tanked a 5% punch from Deku. Later on, 5% Deku is shown to just casually shatter through stone, so that's a pretty impressive feat. However, there is one more feat that I see a lot of people give to Todoroki, and I don't know if I can be as generous. Everyone knows about the moment where he tanks the hit from Howitzer Impact, and somehow doesn't die. He gets knocked out, but he doesn't really have any serious wounds as far as we can tell, at least visually. However, I don't know if I can give him this feat since it's vague, but there are a couple times where it looks like he's sending up an ice shield, and in the anime it's a little more clear as they show Bakugo specifically hitting ice first, so it definitely seems to me that Todoroki didn't tank the full brunt of the attack. Either way, his durability is very vague because this was still all the way back in the sports festival, and I'm sure he's gotten tougher, I just don't have any way to know. Alright, now that I've gotten through their physical stats, how tough they are, how fast they are, it's time to get to the real meat of the video. How strong is their fire? Now, one thing I kinda have to get out of the way is, this isn't real fire, this is anime fire. So when these characters are shooting fire at each other, it's not just the heat that's the problem, these attacks also appear to have a significant amount of brunt force to them. So it's not exactly the same as a flamethrower, it's more like a fiery punch to the face. For example, you have Zuko who is smashing through rocks pretty easily with fire. You have Todoroki clashing with Deku's 100% punch all the way back in the sports festival. So we just have to keep in mind that the fire in these series do have this extra fictional quality to it. But how do they compare in heat? Well, I'm just gonna get it out of the way. In terms of firepower, Todoroki is just so much more powerful. So for this, I'm going to go to the joint training arc, specifically Todoroki versus Tetsutetsu. Tetsutetsu's whole thing is that he can make his body metallic, specifically giving it the properties of steel. Now, in this fight, Todoroki straight up threatens to melt Tetsutetsu. Now, he obviously doesn't, but he gets dangerously close, warning Tetsutetsu that he will get more than just burned in this fight, and it is clear that Tetsutetsu is taking significant damage from it. Now, I don't know how much that damage is, but in order to melt steel, he would have to get his fire above 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just absurd. That isn't even to mention that Tetsutetsu's steel is probably stronger than normal steel, as he states that part of his quirk training was to resist against heat, meaning his melting point is probably higher anyway. Plus, in the Endeavor Agency arc, Todoroki shows the ability to focus his fire, making it even more powerful. And Zuko just doesn't even compare. Hell, the Avatar verse just doesn't even compare when it comes to this kind of firepower. If we look at Ozai, probably one of the most powerful firebenders in the series, in terms of portrayal, he's just shown to be more powerful than Zuko in general, and even he doesn't even come close to what Todoroki was doing. In his fight with Aang, Ozai was even trying to blast through the rock shields that Aang had made, but in the end, he couldn't even melt the rock. He got it close. It was all red and stuff, meaning he was probably getting close to melting it, but in the end it was the brunt force of his attacks that blasted through. And this was a comet-empowered Ozai. Zuko, without the comet, is so much weaker than that, he couldn't even come close to approaching what Todoroki is capable of doing with his fire. The difference in firepower is just absurd. And none of that is even to mention the things that Todoroki can do that Zuko just can't. Todoroki has ice that even in the beginning of the series, he shattered the USJ Nomu with it. Granted, the USJ Nomu doesn't have ice resistance, but neither does Zuko. So unless Zuko is constantly on the defensive and trying to melt every single ice attack that comes at him, he's just gonna get shattered like the same Nomu. That isn't even to mention the scale of some of his ice attacks, some towering over houses even. Plus, and this is manga only, you have the Flash Freeze Heat Wave, an ability where he could simulate the same explosion that he did in the fight against Deku, where he cooled down the area and then heated it up rapidly. These are just techniques that Zuko would have to really focus to dodge and counter, and it really just gives him a hard time in this fight. Really, the matchup has the odds stacked against Zuko. Not only does he just have a massive disadvantage in overall firepower, Todoroki has a natural fire resistance. While Zuko does showcase some fire resistance in tanking some explosions, it's nowhere near to the same degree. He has to actively bend fire around him in order to avoid taking significant damage from it. So really, there isn't a lot stopping Todoroki from just sending out a blast of fire or sending out a blast of ice and just ending the fight quickly. That being said, I don't want to make it sound like Zuko doesn't stand a single chance. He does have some advantages in this fight. For one, he can bend fire around him. He has a lot more control over fire than Todoroki ever will. That's just a part of what firebending is. His versatility of attacks is just so much greater, and he could actively utilize Todoroki's fire against him. That being said, there has to be a limit to how much fire he can control, and even if he were to send all of Todoroki's fire back at him, it wouldn't win the fight. Todoroki can tank his own flames. He can tank well above his own flames, with the resulting backlash only being slowing down and getting somewhat weaker. And even if you want to deem fire attacks completely ineffective against Zuko simply because he can bend fire, that doesn't dismiss the idea of him getting frozen to death. Despite the fact that Zuko can generate fire, there's again a limit to that. He's never had to deal with ice on the same scale that Todoroki can create it. And because of that, he'd probably have to be on the evasive, not the defensive, in order to counter ice attacks, which just isn't going to help him in the overall battle. And this is where the underlying disadvantage comes in. There's just nothing that Zuko can do from a distance. His fire isn't going to do anything to Todoroki, so his only chance is to get up close and hit him. So granted, if Zuko gets in close, he could probably win. He is an incredibly skilled martial artist, since firebending is literally based on a martial art, not to mention the fact that he's a really skilled swordsman being trained by Pian Dao, the same dude that trained Sokka, largely considered one of the best sword fighters in the entire series. And that's just something that Todoroki doesn't have. He's not a very skilled fighter, much less a skilled close combatant. That's just not his thing. So again, if Zuko gets in close, he could very likely win the fight due to having the ability to hurt him and having much greater skill in close combat. The problem is, I don't see a scenario in which Zuko actually manages to get close. Todoroki's whole thing is fighting from a distance and blasting out large-scale attacks, as I said earlier. He has no incentive to even let Zuko get close at all, and if Zuko does get close, he can just use his ice to evade much faster than Zuko can chase him. That's even assuming Zuko would have a chance to try and get close. He'd have to constantly evade attacks that are just much greater than what he can deal with. And when you take all this into account, there's just a very small chance that Zuko can do anything. Not only is he limited in the kind of damage he can deal to Todoroki, he's just limited in the ability to actually get close and deal that damage. Meanwhile, Todoroki can just keep spamming fire and ice and alternating to make sure he doesn't overheat or cool down too much. Overall, this matchup is just overwhelmingly in Todoroki's favor, and I think Zuko has a very small chance of actually pulling a victory here. Anyway guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. This is just me starting out on this platform, and I really wanted to start with something that seemed fun. I'm still getting the hang of things. Editing and voice recording are just things I haven't had to do in a while, and there's definitely going to be some inconsistencies in this video that I hope to work out in the future as I keep going. But if you liked what you saw overall, I hope you can stick around, and I'll keep doing my best here. Have a wonderful day.